Police officers mockingly dismissed a black man's desperate pleas during what seemed like a routine stop. But their laughter turned to silence when the judge addressed him as Colonel. No one saw what was coming next. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment on where you're watching from. Let's get started. In the Westbridge Police Department, nights often revealed an ugliness few witnessed by day. Officers trudged in and out, logging mundane reports and ignoring quiet pleas. Among those detained sat Malik Jefferson, a tall, broad-shouldered black man whose calm unsettled the station's usual routine. He had been arrested after a minor dispute at a neighborhood cafe, where he'd intervened to shield a frightened barista. But the officers didn't want explanations. They laughed at his steady composure, sneered when he politely asked for due process. No one imagined he could outrank them in every sense. They never guessed his true status. Inside the station's worn lobby, Officer Grant typed a report about Malik's arrest, sprinkling it with phrases like uncooperative attitude and resisted instructions. Across the room, Sergeant Blake sipped cheap coffee, bemused by Malik's quiet insistence that he receive a phone call. "You'll wait like everyone else," Blake barked. "You're not special, understand?" Behind them, a rookie stared at Malik's posture, upright, disciplined, and strangely dignified. Something about this man felt different, but the rookie said nothing. Laughter bounced off scuffed walls when Malik calmly asked for respect. To these officers, he was nobody, just another detainee, an easy target. Hours later, Malik found himself locked in a holding cell, the harsh overhead lights flickering every few seconds. He recalled distant nights on deployment, when fear and tension filled the air, yet discipline kept him grounded. He reminded himself to stay calm. Soon a judge would hear his story. Despite the jeering officers, he believed in the system's capacity for justice. Outside the cell, Sergeant Blake joked with colleagues about another tough guy who thinks he's above the law. Malik prayed for patience, clinging to memories of salutes, medals, and his sworn duty. Let them laugh for now, he thought. Across town, Judge Helena Carter reviewed her morning calendar. Known for fairness and an unwavering gaze, she had seen every kind of defendant. A note beside Malik Jefferson's name caught her eye. Claims military background. Requested phone call, denied. Though procedural details were scant, she sensed something unusual. A former JAG attorney, she recognized the signs of mishandled arrests. Were the officers ignoring standard protocol? She set the file aside with a sigh. Another day, another puzzle. If Malik was in the service, she would uncover the truth soon enough. She never underestimated the significance of rank. Justice demanded diligence. Morning broke in the station, bringing stale coffee and a buzz of routine chatter. Malik heard footsteps approach. Officer Grant opened the cell, smirking. "Come on, soldier, let's see how tough you are in front of a judge." Malik stepped into the corridor, posture steady, and walked past other detainees who eyed him curiously. No one spoke, but Malik felt their silent questions. His thoughts turned to the oath he'd sworn, the uniform he'd worn with pride. Soon, the truth would surface. He reminded himself not to let anger cloud his judgment. Justice needed calm. Patience was a soldier's virtue. In courtroom 2, Judge Carter began her usual roll call, handling small cases with swift efficiency. The gallery murmured occasionally as names were read and defendants shuffled forward. Then Malik's case was announced. He stood before the bench, flanked by Officer Grant and Sergeant Blake. Judge Carter's gaze sharpened. "Mr. Jefferson, I see you were denied a phone call. Care to explain?" Malik met her eyes. "I asked several times. They refused." Gasps flickered through the room. Carter frowned. "Officers, is that accurate?" she demanded. Grant shrugged. Blake stared at the floor. Something told Carter this was no simple case. The judge flipped through the file, eyes narrowing at vague statements and repeated claims that Malik was aggressive. She looked at him again, noticing his composed stance, how his shoulders stayed level. This was not the posture of a violent man. "Do you have representation?" she asked. Malik shook his head. "No, Your Honor. They blocked my attempts to call anyone." Officer Grant snorted, earning a glare from the bench. Carter made a note. "We'll address that violation immediately. And what's this about you claiming military service?" Malik responded quietly, "I don't claim it. I live it. I'm a colonel." A stunned hush fell over the courtroom. Officer Grant's smirk vanished, while Sergeant Blake blinked in disbelief. Judge Carter paused. "Colonel of what exactly?" Malik kept his voice level. "United States Army Reserve, ma'am. Served active duty for 12 years, then transferred to the reserve. I still hold rank." The judge caught her breath, recognizing the significance. Those officers had mocked a man who outranked them in ways they couldn't fathom. She pursed her lips, turning slowly toward Grant and Blake. "So you laughed at a colonel?" Her tone dripped with quiet reproach. They squirmed, saying nothing. The gallery watched. Judge Carter tapped her pen against the docket. Officer Grant stepped forward. "On what grounds did you deny this man's phone call?" Grant cleared his throat, stumbling over excuses. "He was uncooperative. I didn't think he deserved special treatment." Carter's gaze hardened. "And you, Sergeant Blake?" The sergeant muttered about procedure, avoiding eye contact. Carter raised a brow, scanning the arrest report. Too many blanks, too little evidence. "This is unacceptable. I'm ordering an inquiry. Colonel Jefferson, you'll get your legal call now." She gestured to the bailiff. "Make arrangements. We'll reconvene after he has counsel." Tension gripped the room. As the bailiff led Malik to a side office, the crowd buzzed. Word spread fast. The man they'd ridiculed was a colonel. Curious onlookers craned their necks to see him, while Grant and Blake huddled, exchanging anxious whispers. Judge Carter observed them from the bench, mind already racing. She remembered her own service days, when rank demanded respect. This arrest smelled of prejudice and arrogance, not real policing. In the hallway, Malik dialed a familiar number. A calm voice answered, promising immediate legal aid. Relief flickered in Malik's eyes. At least now he had a chance to defend his name. 10 minutes later, court resumed. Malik stood beside a public defender who'd arrived, eager to help. Judge Carter folded her hands. "Colonel Jefferson, this court regrets any violation of your rights. Before proceeding, let's clarify the charges. You're accused of disturbing the peace and resisting arrest. How do you plead?" Malik glanced at his defender, then spoke evenly. "Not guilty. I was protecting a waitress from harassment. The officers refused to listen." Carter's gaze swept across Grant and Blake. She saw their discomfort. "We'll examine the evidence. This uniform does not absolve you of accountability." A hush followed her words. Surveillance footage from the cafe soon played on a small screen, capturing Malik intervening between a customer and the waitress. The clip showed no aggression from Malik. Instead, he calmly diffused the threat, urging the man to leave. Judge Carter eyed Grant and Blake. "This conflicts with your statements describing Mr. Jefferson as hostile. Explain yourselves." Blake's face reddened. "He refused our orders at the scene, so we detained him." Carter shook her head. "Refusing to cower isn't the same as resisting arrest. Why twist the facts?" She let the silence hang. Malik stayed poised, content to let truth speak. In the hush, Grant and Blake realized their mocking had backfired. They had treated an officer like a criminal, ignoring the facts. Judge Carter cleared her throat, turning to Malik. "Colonel Jefferson, the court apologizes for the misconduct you've endured. I'm dismissing these charges. However, there will be a formal inquiry into these officers' actions." She eyed the men grimly. Mockery ends where justice begins. As the gavel fell, the room exhaled, stunned by how swiftly power had shifted. Malik exuded quiet relief. The truth had prevailed. After the gavel's echo faded, hush settled across the hallway beyond courtroom 2. Colonel Malik Jefferson, newly freed of all charges, stepped outside and breathed in crisp morning air. Yesterday's clothes were rumpled from a sleepless night in custody. Though he had navigated war zones, the hostility in that station cut deeper. He lifted his phone and called Captain Helena Hughes, fellow reservist. "They dropped the charges," Malik said quietly. "But this isn't over." Helena's concern was palpable. "The department ignored your rights. I'm forwarding everything to legal affairs. The Army won't stand for this." Malik glanced at the courthouse doors. "I'm not out for revenge, but they profiled me and mocked my rank. That can't go unanswered." Helena agreed. "JAG might request your statement for a broader inquiry." Malik nodded, tension in his voice. "Thanks, Captain. I'll keep you posted." Judge Helena Carter, a former JAG lawyer herself, couldn't shake the incident. She'd seen wrongful arrests before, but the disregard for protocol here was blatant. Later that morning, she drafted a request for departmental review. Internal Affairs would interview the arresting officers and take Colonel Jefferson's sworn statement. Carter read over her notes, anger stirring. She believed in accountability, especially when prejudice was involved. Justice demanded more than apologies. It demanded real consequences. By noon, local headlines proclaimed a high-ranking officer's wrongful detention. Sergeant Blake stared at his phone, stomach churning. Officer Grant paced behind him. "You said we could charge him with resisting," Grant muttered. Blake shook his head. "We messed up. He's a colonel. Did you hear that?" Grant's face paled. "He never showed ID." Blake snorted bitterly. "He asked for a phone call and we refused. What do we do now?" Silence answered. Captain Darlene Pierce summoned both men to her office. "I got a notice from Judge Carter. An inquiry is coming. Explain yourselves." They traded worried looks. Grant cleared his throat. "He disobeyed orders." Pierce glowered. "We have cafe footage showing him protecting a barista. This was a bad arrest, and you mocked a colonel. Prepare for scrutiny." She dismissed them with an icy glare. Malik arrived home and found Ms. Ruth, an elderly neighbor, on his porch. "You all right, son?" she asked, voice trembling. He nodded. "Charges were dropped." She squeezed his hand. "They see your skin and ignore your character. But you made it home." He thanked her gently, stepping inside to face framed photos of his Army career. He switched on a lamp, determined to document every detail before the inquiry began. The phone rang nonstop. Major Daniel Roth, a Pentagon legal advisor, was among the callers. "Sir, we saw the footage. The department violated your rights. We stand ready if you pursue civil action." Malik hesitated. "I'll wait for the internal review. If they bury it, I'll sue." Roth's tone was grim. "Understood, Colonel. We support you." Malik ended the call, tension gnawing at his calm resolve. At headquarters, Captain Pierce reviewed the body cam footage. She saw Malik politely requesting a phone call while Sergeant Blake sneered. Pierce paused the video, dismayed. She'd built her leadership on community outreach. Now, her subordinates had jeopardized everything. Her phone rang. A stern voice from City Hall demanded answers. Pierce promised a thorough inquiry, though she sensed that trust was already broken. Judge Carter scheduled a preliminary hearing for potential disciplinary action. Local media stoked debates about bias, accountability, and police reform. The district attorney's office reviewed the flimsy arrest report, rife with contradictions. Assistant DA Marisol Valdez frowned at phrases like looking defiant. She muttered, "This is indefensible. We'll have to act." Behind the scenes, tensions rose as Westbridge braced for a reckoning. 2 nights later, Malik visited the cafe. Leah, the barista he had defended, rushed forward. "I'm so sorry you got in trouble," she said, eyes downcast. Malik shook his head. "You did nothing wrong. I was worried about you." Her voice trembled. "The man who threatened me hasn't returned, but the police kept questioning me. They said you're a colonel?" Malik nodded softly. "I'm also a neighbor who saw someone in danger." Across town, Sergeant Blake lay awake, replaying Judge Carter's stern admonishment. He recalled how Malik's silent composure made him feel small. Grant had texted him, panicked about attorneys. Blake stared at the ceiling, wrestling with guilt. Perhaps they'd profiled Malik unfairly. The moment he heard Colonel, an icy fear cut through him. It wasn't just fear, it was shame. Too late now. In the morning, demonstrators gathered outside the precinct, demanding accountability. Captain Pierce faced the crowd, promising a fair investigation. Cameras snapped. "Why was Colonel Jefferson denied a basic right?" demanded one protester. Pierce swallowed hard. "We're committed to transparency." Inside, tensions rose as staff grumbled about the scrutiny. But some older officers quietly welcomed it, hoping to purge bad practices that stained the badge. Officer Morales, a Marine veteran, approached Internal Affairs with raw files. "Here's unedited body cam footage," he said. "I'm done with people trimming evidence." The investigator thanked him, eyebrows rising at the content. Morales added softly, "That colonel served our country. We wear different uniforms, but we share the same values." Grant and Blake forgot that. Time they learned. That evening, Malik received a call from Judge Carter's clerk. A special session was set for next week. "Witnesses will be called, including the barista," the clerk said, relief mingled with determination. Malik longed for transparency. He glanced at an old Army photo on his wall, recalling the day he was pinned colonel. Whatever came next, he was ready to stand for justice again. Meanwhile, the Westbridge City Council held an emergency meeting to address community outrage. Residents packed the chamber, decrying racial profiling and demanding structural reforms. Councilman Reeves, who had witnessed Malik's decorum in a past civic event, spoke firmly. "Colonel Jefferson is an exemplary citizen. We must hold our police force accountable for treating him otherwise." Others called for immediate suspension of Blake and Grant, while some cautioned against rushed decisions. Eventually, the council agreed to fund an independent auditor, ensuring no tampering with evidence or statements. Murmurs of approval rippled through the crowd, but many felt it was just a first step. Once outside, local activists vowed continued pressure. "No more hush-hush deals," one declared. That same evening, Malik spoke with Leah again, reassuring her about the upcoming hearing. She admitted sleepless nights, worried the officers might retaliate. He gently reminded her that truth was on their side and that the court would protect witnesses. Meanwhile, Ms. Ruth insisted on bringing homemade stew for Malik, fretting over his well-being. As he ate in grateful silence, he remembered fellow soldiers who had endured injustices upon returning home. Their stories echoed his own. He promised himself that once this inquiry concluded, he would push for deeper reform, not just a single hearing. If his rank meant anything, it was a responsibility to defend those who felt powerless. Even off the battlefield, his oath remained. In the days that followed, official summons were served for the special session. Judge Carter received new evidence from Internal Affairs. Raw footage revealing how Blake and Grant had sneered at Malik's credentials and denied basic rights. The local newspaper published an editorial demanding accountability, calling the incident a stark reminder that prejudice endures. Activists organized a peaceful march, urging respect for veterans of all backgrounds. Captain Pierce, intent on salvaging the department's reputation, scheduled diversity training and disciplinary hearings. Some officers rolled their eyes, resentful of the scrutiny. Others, like Morales, expressed relief. "We can't serve the public if we ignore our own failures," he told colleagues. As tension built, Colonel Jefferson prepared for the hearing by compiling statements from witnesses, determined that his story would spark meaningful change. He prayed the truth would guide them all toward justice. The day of the special session arrived in a swirl of news cameras and anxious whispers. By 8 in the morning, onlookers formed a line outside the courthouse, hoping to witness the proceedings that promised accountability for the Westbridge Police Department. Inside, a hush spread across the marble floors as Colonel Malik Jefferson entered, accompanied by his legal counsel and followed by a knot of reporters who tried snapping quick photos. His posture, straight, disciplined, and calm, reflected a man who had faced far worse than jeering officers. Yet the tension in his jaw betrayed the gravity of what lay ahead. Meanwhile, Judge Helena Carter prepared in her chambers, scanning updated statements from internal affairs. The file had expanded considerably since she first heard Malik's case. Now it included raw body cam recordings, eyewitness accounts, and a letter from the Army acknowledging Colonel Jefferson's sterling service record. She breathed a measured sigh. Today would not be easy, for behind every uniform was a system of daily choices, some fair, some riddled with bias. Her job was to peel back the layers and reveal the truth. Promptly at 9, the session began in courtroom 4. A hush fell over the rows of seats, which had filled with city officials, community advocates, and a handful of curious spectators. Captain Darlene Pierce sat behind the prosecution's table, representing the department's leadership. Next to her, Sergeant Blake and Officer Grant wore carefully pressed uniforms, their faces grim. They had arrived early to confer with union representatives, but even the union's attorney looked uneasy, aware that evidence would speak louder than spin. Judge Carter rapped her gavel once, silencing a ripple of murmurs. "Let's begin," she said, her tone firm. "We are here to determine if there is sufficient cause to recommend disciplinary action against Sergeant Blake and Officer Grant in connection to Colonel Jefferson's wrongful arrest and denial of rights." She paused, scanning the room. "We will hear testimony under oath. We will review video and audio evidence. Our aim is truth, not theatrics." The first witness called was Leah, the barista at the cafe. She moved hesitantly to the stand, smoothing her plain skirt, eyes darting at the crowd. After being sworn in, she recounted the confrontation that sparked everything. "A customer became aggressive with me. Colonel Jefferson intervened, asking him to back off. When the officers arrived, they seemed focused on arresting Colonel Jefferson, not the aggressor. I tried explaining, but they dismissed me." Her voice wavered when she recalled how Blake had brushed her aside. It felt like they'd already decided he was guilty. Colonel Jefferson's attorney guided Leah through key moments: how Malik never raised his voice or threatened anyone, how the aggressor fled before the police could question him, and how Leah herself was never asked for a formal statement at the scene. The court took note. Officer Grant's face tightened, but he sat expressionless, arms folded. Next, Sergeant Blake was called to testify. He stood stiffly, refusing to meet Malik's gaze. Judge Carter's questions were blunt. Why was Colonel Jefferson refused a phone call? Blake cleared his throat, citing officer safety and claiming Jefferson had been combative. Carter's eyes narrowed. "We have footage, Sergeant, that paints a different picture." She nodded at the bailiff, who cued the unedited body cam video. The entire courtroom watched the scene play out. Malik calmly asking for a phone call, Blake sneering, Grant shaking his head, and neither officer offering any accommodation. The only aggression shown was in their dismissive tone, their mocking laughter. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Blake swallowed hard. "Sergeant," Judge Carter said, pausing the video at a frame that captured his disdainful sneer, "you stated you felt threatened. Where exactly do you see any threatening behavior from Colonel Jefferson?" Blake's gaze flickered over the still image. He gave me attitude." The judge let the silence stretch. "Attitude," she repeated. "That is not legal grounds to deny constitutional rights." When Officer Grant took the stand, he offered excuses about policing instincts and maintaining control, but the judge methodically dismantled his reasoning using the cafe surveillance tape that showed Malik stepping between Leah and the threatening customer. At no point did Malik become confrontational. Rather, his posture was protective, quietly firm, the way one might expect from a trained officer in the service. Faced with those images, Grant's arguments collapsed. The session's midpoint brought a crucial witness, Captain Pierce. She walked to the stand in a crisp uniform, composure tinged with regret. Under oath, she described how Westbridge PD expected officers to follow policy regarding suspects' rights. She acknowledged that the footage of Grant and Blake contradicted department standards. "This department does not condone the denial of phone calls to any suspect, let alone someone with Colonel Jefferson's record. We pride ourselves on upholding the law. Clearly, we fell short." In a surprising turn, the Assistant District Attorney, Marisol Valdez, presented a letter from Army Legal Affairs. It detailed Colonel Jefferson's accomplishments, including multiple commendations, leadership training, and 8 years of active duty in conflict zones. "This letter underscores Colonel Jefferson's credibility," Valdez told the judge. "He wasn't merely an innocent bystander. He's a man sworn to defend rights, ironically denied his own." Murmurs spread as the letter was read aloud. Even the Union attorney began to look ill at ease, aware that public sentiment had likely turned against the officers. Judge Carter took notes, face impassive but keenly focused. The question wasn't whether a crime had been committed, that was for a different forum, but whether these officers should face disciplinary action. The mounting evidence made it difficult to dispute that they had harbored bias, lied, and violated procedures. In the gallery, Captain Helena Hughes sat quietly, representing the Army Reserve's interest. She observed Colonel Jefferson's steady composure. Neither pride nor resentment contorted his expression. He looked tired, yet resolute. Her heart clenched at the fact that he'd faced more respect in war-torn regions than in his own hometown. She silently vowed to support him however she could. After a short recess, the proceedings resumed. Judge Carter allowed Colonel Jefferson to speak, not as a formal witness but to address the court. Rising from his seat, he turned toward the spectators. "I'm not here to tarnish every officer," he began, voice low. "Law enforcement and military share many values: duty, discipline, protection of the innocent. But those values were ignored when I was taken into custody." He paused, glancing at Sergeant Blake and Officer Grant. "I'm disappointed that men who wear a badge found it easy to laugh at my request for a phone call, and easier still to misrepresent the facts." A hush deepened. Malik's calm words carried weight far beyond the average citizen's complaint. "I hold no malice in my heart," he continued, "but when prejudice and pride overtake policy, people get hurt. I swore an oath to serve my country. These officers swore an oath to serve this community. Oaths don't vanish under stress. They become vital." Judge Carter inclined her head. "Thank you, Colonel Jefferson. The court appreciates your perspective." She signaled him to return to his seat. In that moment, no one missed the quiet dignity on his face, the soldier's bearing that demanded respect without ever shouting for it. The final piece of evidence came from Internal Affairs. official findings that Blake and Grant had violated multiple regulations. The recommended course was immediate disciplinary suspension, with a possible termination after a full departmental review. Captain Pierce, reading the report, closed her eyes, as though absorbing a personal blow. She'd joined the force to safeguard public trust, and now 2 of her subordinates had undermined it. By late afternoon, Judge Carter concluded the session. Having weighed the testimony and viewed the evidence, I find ample cause to recommend disciplinary action against Sergeant Blake and Officer Grant. The department's leadership has indicated a willingness to pursue it. I am forwarding all findings to the appropriate oversight committees. She eyed the 2 officers. As for your future on the force, that will be decided by your superiors, but I strongly urge the department to act decisively. This community deserves accountability. Her gavel struck once, finalizing the day's proceedings. Outside, cameras flashed as Colonel Jefferson emerged. Journalists clamored for sound bites, but Malik simply said, "Let the inquiry's conclusions speak for themselves." When a reporter pressed him about possible lawsuits, he answered gently, "I'm reviewing options, but more than money, I want systemic change." Then he slipped past the throng, rejoining Captain Hughes at the courthouse steps. That night, Westbridge's local news led with footage of the hearing. Viewers across the city saw Leah's tearful testimony, watched the unedited body cam footage, and heard Colonel Jefferson's quiet but powerful remarks. Debates sparked on social media over deeper reforms needed. Many applauded the judge's swift response. A few defended Blake and Grant, insisting it was just a misunderstanding. But the overwhelming sentiment was clear. Respect had been denied to a man who earned it long ago, and the community demanded better. For Malik, the day brought a sense of relief, but also a sobering awareness of how easily such injustice could occur. Tomorrow he would call Ms. Ruth and reassure her he was safe. He would debrief with Army contacts about the hearing, then continue figuring out how best to advocate for those without his rank or resources. Because if the system could mistreat a colonel, he feared what it did to those with no voice at all. 3 days after the disciplinary hearing, Colonel Malik Jefferson found himself back at City Hall, this time to speak with Mayor Roland Langley. Though the mayor had sent a formal invitation, Malik suspected it was more about optics than genuine reform. Still, he arrived promptly, dressed in a simple blazer and slacks, ignoring the cameras that trailed him. For years he'd learned how to maintain composure in the face of tension. Today was no exception. A secretary led him into the mayor's spacious office, where large windows overlooked Westbridge's skyline. Mayor Langley, short and bespectacled, shook Malik's hand with forced enthusiasm. "Colonel Jefferson, thank you for meeting me," he said, gesturing to a leather chair. Malik sat, noticing framed photographs of political events and dedications on the paneled walls. Langley cleared his throat. "I want to express my regrets for your ordeal. Our city values its veterans. We never intended to disrespect you." Malik listened calmly. "Thank you, Mayor, but an apology alone doesn't solve the deeper issues. We saw a systematic disregard for rights that morning. My rank got attention, but plenty of others don't have that protection." Langley nodded. "Precisely why I asked you here. I'm establishing a police accountability task force, and your perspective would be invaluable. We can show the public we're serious about change." Skepticism flickered in Malik's eyes. He glanced around the opulent office, noting how politicians often made grand promises. "I'm open to discussions," he replied. "But I won't be a figurehead. If this task force won't have real power to investigate complaints and recommend discipline, it's a waste of time." Langley shifted. "We'll have to negotiate details with the city council. They control budget approvals." Malik's jaw tightened. "Then I suggest you bring them on board soon." By the time he left City Hall, reporters swarmed. Microphones thrust near his face, Questions flew. "Colonel, do you trust the mayor's task force idea? Are you planning to file a lawsuit? What about the officers who arrested you?" Malik kept his response measured. "I'm exploring every option. Real reform takes more than talk. I hope Westbridge is ready." Later that afternoon, he met Captain Helena Hughes at a quiet cafe. Over cups of tea, she updated him on Army inquiries. "They're monitoring the city's actions closely," she said. "If the department fails to address the incident, the Pentagon might intervene. But that's a last resort." Malik nodded. "I'd rather see local accountability. We don't need a federal hammer unless it's absolutely necessary." Hughes smiled sympathetically. "You've always preferred calm negotiation before drastic measures." He shrugged. "War taught me the cost of conflict, but ignoring injustice has a cost too." Meanwhile, the Westbridge Police Department wrestled with the fallout. Captain Darlene Pierce convened a staff meeting requiring attendance by every officer. The tension was palpable as she strode to the front, arms crossed, eyes scanning the room. "We must restore trust," she began. "The department has initiated disciplinary proceedings against Sergeant Blake and Officer Grant. Until that process concludes, they are on unpaid leave. Furthermore, we're instituting mandatory refresher training on constitutional rights." A few low grumbles rose from the back row. Pierce's voice turned steely. "If anyone in this room believes ignoring protocol is acceptable, I suggest you resign now. I won't tolerate misconduct under my watch." Murmurs rippled. Officer Morales, who had shared unedited footage, exhaled relief. He wanted a department that honored its oath, not one that ridiculed a colonel for asking to call a lawyer. Others quietly seethed, claiming the administration overreacted. Sergeant Blake, glaring from a corner, felt betrayed by what he called excessive scrutiny. But the wheels of reform were turning, whether he agreed or not. That evening, a diverse crowd gathered at the Westbridge Community Center for a forum on policing. The schedule listed Colonel Jefferson as the final speaker. By the time he arrived, the auditorium buzzed with conversation. Local activists, concerned citizens, and off-duty officers filled the seats. On stage sat the moderator, Councilman Reeves, who nodded warmly when Malik took his place beside other panelists. Each speaker recounted stories of misconduct, from wrongful stops to excessive force. Some described feeling powerless against a system stacked against them. Others gave credit to good officers who had stepped up, bridging gaps. When Malik's turn arrived, the room fell silent. He spoke with quiet conviction. "I stand here because my rank provided me a shield that many lack. But that shield shouldn't be necessary. Our Constitution guarantees basic rights for all. Laughter or brutality in the face of someone's request for fairness is unacceptable. It stains everyone who serves, uniformed or not." He paused, scanning the crowd. "In the Army, I learned we're only as strong as our commitment to the mission. The mission here should be public safety and trust. Without trust, community and police relations crumble. If we want real change, we need accountability measures, proper training, and genuine dialogue. Not as a one-time fix, but as an ongoing promise to do better." Applause erupted, emotional and sustained. Even a few off-duty officers stood, moved by his sincerity. In the front row, Ms. Ruth wiped tears from her eyes. She had insisted on coming, determined to see her boy speak. Afterward, she pressed forward, hugging him tight. "You tell them, Malik. Don't let them hush your voice." He kissed her cheek. "Never, Ms. Ruth." "Promise." Sergeant Blake watched a live stream of Malik's speech on his phone. Though he wouldn't admit it, guilt gnawed at him. Scenes replayed in his mind, ignoring Malik's calm requests, hearing, "I'm in the service," and sneering anyway. Pride and prejudice had guided him that night. Now the city was up in arms, and his future on the force looked bleak. Yet he still blamed Malik for the trouble. He could have just complied, he muttered, though deep down he knew that was a lie. Elsewhere, in a dim bar near downtown, Officer Grant drowned his frustrations in cheap whiskey. A local journalist slipped onto the next stool, trying to coax a statement. Grant mumbled that everything was blown out of proportion. When pressed about the body cam evidence, he had no coherent explanation. The journalist's notes captured the bitterness of a man facing consequences for the first time in his career, uncertain how to navigate them. Days turned into a week of intense developments. The mayor's proposed task force began forming, with invitations extended to community leaders, mental health professionals, faith-based organizers, and Colonel Jefferson himself. Malik had yet to confirm, wary of empty symbolism. Meanwhile, Judge Carter's official findings from the disciplinary hearing arrived at the district attorney's office, recommending a thorough review of past arrests under Blake and Grant. Suspicions arose that their incident with Malik was not isolated. If patterns of misconduct emerged, more heads would roll. Malik received a late-night call from a timid young man named Dion, who claimed to have been harassed by the same officers weeks before. "I saw you on TV," Dion whispered. "They pulled me over, said I looked suspicious, made me sit on the curb. When I asked why, they said I was resisting." Dion never filed a complaint. "I didn't think anyone would believe me," he said. Malik's chest tightened. "I believe you. I'll connect you with the people investigating." Another piece of the puzzle slotted into place. These men likely had a habit of violating rights. The next morning, Ms. Ruth marched up Malik's porch steps, brandishing a worn notebook. "These are stories from my church group," she explained. "Times those same officers roughed up our boys, said hateful words, forced searches." Her eyes flashed. "They're all telling me to deliver this to you." Malik accepted it gently. "Thank you, Ms. Ruth. I'll make sure the task force sees this if it's formed properly." Captain Pierce, meanwhile, reviewed old complaints tied to Blake and Grant. Many had been classified unfounded. Some lacked proper evidence, or the complainants never followed through, likely too frightened or mistrustful. Now, with new scrutiny, these complaints demanded re-examination. Pierce felt a weight on her shoulders. She believed in second chances, but also recognized the department couldn't hide misconduct any longer. Her office phone buzzed. The city council wanted an update. She steeled herself, determined to act. No more sweeping dirt under the rug. At day's end, Malik found a moment to breathe in the hush of his living room. The walls held pictures of him in uniform, smiling among fellow soldiers, and postcards from places he'd been deployed. Memories of camaraderie contrasted starkly with the lonely battle he now waged. He thought of Ms. Ruth's notebook, of Dion's phone call, of the young barista who trusted him enough to speak up. These stories weren't just evidence, they were pleas for a fairer system. His phone lit with a message from Captain Hughes. "The Army stands with you if you need further support." Malik exhaled. Another message from a local teen arrived next. "Thank you for standing up for us. We're inspired by your courage, Colonel." He felt a surge of resolve. The spotlight had found him, whether he liked it or not. He would use it for those who had no shield, no rank, no voice. He gazed out the window as sunset cast an orange glow over Westbridge's skyline. Tomorrow he would contact the mayor's office with his conditions for serving on the task force. If the city truly wanted reform, it couldn't just be a photo op. It had to be a turning point, real power to investigate, to recommend discipline, and to track patterns of abuse. Otherwise, he'd walk away. Too many times, promises vanished once cameras stopped rolling. This fight demanded transparency and courage. His phone pinged one last time before he closed his eyes, a small prayer forming on his lips. That justice would prevail, that hearts would soften, and that change might come from a moment of adversity. Because no matter how high his rank, Malik wanted one simple outcome: a world where an innocent person's plea for fairness was never again met with laughter. Malik Jefferson's conditions for joining the mayor's Police Accountability Task Force arrived at City Hall on a Monday morning, neatly typed and unequivocal. The document insisted on 3 key powers: the authority to subpoena officers' records, an independent budget to hire oversight specialists, and guaranteed public reporting of findings. It landed on Mayor Langley's desk, alongside his steaming cup of coffee. The mayor sighed heavily, scanning the points. He realized that if he refused, any credibility for his reform effort would crumble. News of Malik's demands spread quickly among council members, stoking debates on how far they should go to placate a man whose wrongful arrest had shaken the city. Some claimed the mayor had no choice but to meet those terms, lest public outrage intensify. Others whispered that Colonel Jefferson was stepping beyond his role. Who was he to dictate city policy? The council reconvened behind closed doors, weighing public sentiment against political caution. In the hallway, a handful of local reporters hovered, desperate for sound bites. Meanwhile, in a bright community center room across town, Captain Pierce stood before a cluster of curious citizens, leading a workshop on understanding police protocol. A row of battered chairs held people who had come to learn what rights they held during traffic stops, how to file complaints, and why body cam footage sometimes disappeared. The session was part of Pierce's push to mend relations. With every question, she sensed their lingering mistrust. She couldn't blame them. She explained that not all officers ignored policy, but the damage done by a few could overshadow 1,000 quiet good deeds. Before concluding, Pierce mentioned the proposed task force and Colonel Jefferson's name. Heads lifted around the room. Her gut told her they wanted a champion, someone unafraid to challenge City Hall. She wished she could promise them immediate change, but she knew it would be a long fight. That evening, the mayor's office contacted Malik. "The city council is prepared to accept your conditions," said a terse voice. "They request a meeting tomorrow to formalize details." Malik thanked the caller without gloating. He'd expected resistance, but it looked as though the council recognized the necessity of public trust. After ending the call, he exhaled and gazed at the file-strewn desk in his den. Ms. Ruth's notebook lay open, filled with handwritten accounts. Next to it, Dion's statement about his coerced curb set. Then there were nearly a dozen phone messages from others who had come forward since Malik's story broke. Each tale burned with frustration. Each phone call ended in relief that someone was finally listening. Though weighed down by these stories, Malik found a surge of conviction. He meticulously listed every complaint, every name, every incident. If the new task force was genuine, it would address all of them. Otherwise, he'd blow the whistle even louder. It wasn't revenge he sought. He simply refused to let injustice pass unchallenged. The following morning, the mayor's specially convened task force meeting took place in a windowless conference room lined with official city seals. Councilman Reeves presided, wearing his usual pinstriped suit and measured smile. Malik arrived to find 8 others seated around a long table. Civil rights advocates, a public defender, a neighborhood pastor, a representative from the police union, a legal scholar, and 2 city council aides. The mayor entered last, face pulled taut by anxiety. "Welcome," Reeves began, trying to set a collaborative tone. "This task force represents a cross-section of our community. We're here to establish guidelines for improving police accountability." He cast a glance at Malik. "Colonel Jefferson, I believe you have our collective attention." Malik spoke calmly, reiterating that real oversight meant more than rubber-stamping complaints. "We need the power to request data on stops, searches, and arrests, broken down by demographics. We need the authority to recommend discipline if we find patterns of abuse. And we must issue quarterly public reports to keep everyone informed. The police union representative, a burly man named Dawson, shifted in his seat. "You want us to hang officers out to dry anytime a complaint comes in?" he said, voice edged. Malik looked at him evenly. "No, I want a fair process that investigates misconduct properly. Honest officers should welcome that transparency. It protects them from false claims and protects citizens from real harm." Their conversation continued for 2 hours, hammering out rules for how the task force would operate. The mayor occasionally tried to soften Malik's language, but Reeves insisted they keep the colonel's fundamental points intact. By the end, an agreement took shape. The city would approve a small but independent budget for investigations, drawn from discretionary funds. The council would authorize subpoena power in cooperation with the district courts, and the panel would hold monthly public forums to share progress and field questions. Once the final draft was agreed upon, Malik shook the mayor's hand, noticing sweat on Langley's brow. The man looked relieved yet wary, no doubt anticipating blowback from certain corners of the police department. Malik gave him a slight nod, silently acknowledging that their alliance was born of necessity more than camaraderie. Still, it was a start. News of the final deal spread through the city like wildfire. Local outlets reported triumphantly. Colonel Jefferson's demands met. New task force formed. Critics grumbled that the mayor had surrendered too easily. Others hailed it as a historic shift, the first real accountability measure since a short-lived civilian review board disbanded a decade prior. For many, hope stirred that Westbridge could become a model for reform in a nation grappling with similar issues. Late that night, alone in his quiet house, Malik thumbed through messages on social media. Hundreds of people expressed support. Some shared personal stories of negative encounters with law enforcement, and a few spewed hateful remarks about him betraying the city or stoking racial tensions. He ignored the vitriol, heartened by the outpouring of gratitude. Exhausted, he closed his laptop, praying that unity could replace division. There was a long road ahead. In a cramped apartment on the other side of town, Dion scrolled through the same headlines, hopeful that maybe his voice would matter. He thought back to the humiliation he'd felt, forced to sit on the curb while neighbors stared from windows. He remembered how Officer Grant had laughed, making snide comments about people like him. Now Colonel Jefferson was pushing for a system that would hear Dion's complaint. For the first time in ages, he felt optimism flicker inside him. Meanwhile, Sergeant Blake sat in his living room with blinds drawn, anxiously awaiting the disciplinary board's decision. His wife gave him a wide berth, sensing his stormy mood. Would he be fired, reassigned, publicly scapegoated? He still nursed bitterness toward Malik for stirring public uproar. Yet he also recognized how flimsy his excuses sounded in retrospect. If a colonel said he was entitled to a phone call, maybe that should have been enough, regardless of race or attitude. The thought gnawed at him, but he shoved it away. Soon he'd face the board, and if they ruled against him, he might lose everything. In the days that followed, Captain Pierce took swift action on old complaints involving Blake and Grant, reopening cases that had been prematurely dismissed. A pattern emerged of detainees, especially from minority neighborhoods, alleging rough treatment and disrespect. Internal Affairs compiled the evidence, presenting it to Pierce in a lengthy report. "We have enough for termination proceedings," the lead investigator remarked. Pierce rubbed her temples, frustration pounding in her skull. "We can't let this slide again. Proceed with full charges." Officer Grant, equally worried, found his attempts to contact union reps unfruitful. They'd already grown tired of his evasions. Without contrition, his position looked bleak. Rumors swirled that he might try resigning before the board could fire him, dodging official censure. Others whispered he would fight to the end. Either way, the pressure escalated daily, and tensions spilled over into the station halls. As the new Accountability Task Force convened its first session, half the seats in the gallery were filled with community members eager for transparency. Malik sat at the head of a long table with Councilman Reeves, Captain Pierce, the public defender, and several other appointed members. Overhead lights hummed, illuminating a small stage where the group would eventually take public questions. For now, they introduced themselves and laid out basic procedures. The silence in the room felt charged with anticipation. Then a hand rose from the audience. It was Ms. Ruth, wearing her Sunday best hat. "Colonel Jefferson," she said, voice firm, "are we actually going to see changes, or is this another city trick?" The question rippled through the hall, and murmurs of agreement followed. Malik met her gaze. "We won't let this be a trick, Ms. Ruth. We have tools we never had before. Money, subpoena power, monthly reports. We'll push for real progress." Another murmur spread, softer now, tinged with hope. Outside, a small group of off-duty officers watched warily through the glass doors. One mumbled that the colonel had turned the department into a scapegoat. Another shook his head, saying, "If they play it fair, good cops got nothing to hide." The watchers didn't enter, uncertain whether they were ready to engage. That evening, once the meeting ended, Malik lingered as attendees dispersed. Ms. Ruth approached, taking his hand. "I believe you'll do all you can, but I've lived here a long time. I've seen promises vanish. Keep your eyes open, Malik." He smiled gently. "Always." Her wisdom was hard-won. He would honor it by pushing relentlessly, ensuring every voice was heard. In the weeks ahead, the task force would face battles, budget constraints, departmental resistance, political games, but tonight marked a shift in Westbridge's story. For the first time in years, those who felt unheard found a seat at the table. Colonel Jefferson had used the injustice done to him as a catalyst for larger change. And though he carried the weight of many souls' hopes, he moved forward, knowing a single flame could light a path for countless others. For weeks, the newly formed Police Accountability Task Force churned through piles of data, subpoenaed records, and interviewed countless citizens. Papers and transcripts filled the conference tables at City Hall, reflecting complaints that spanned years. Every Tuesday evening, the task force convened a public forum, letting residents step up to a microphone and share their stories. Some spoke haltingly, clinging to shaky recollections of unfair stops. Others arrived with carefully annotated evidence, dates, badge numbers, times. Colonel Malik Jefferson, seated at the table's center, listened intently to each voice. He grew intimately familiar with the patterns: traffic stops in certain neighborhoods, dismissive language toward young people of color, intimidation tactics employed late at night. Word spread that it was safe to speak out, thanks to the colonel's involvement. The audience at these forums swelled, forcing them to shift from the cramped task force conference room to the community center's larger hall. City council members hovered near the back rows, keeping an uneasy watch on developments. Their funding decisions would be swayed by public sentiment, and public sentiment was turning sharply against any notion of business-as-usual policing. The strain showed among the city's higher-ups, but Malik refused to let the momentum die. Meanwhile, the police department's internal affairs cases against Sergeant Blake and Officer Grant accelerated. The evidence revealed a disturbing pattern of misconduct, especially regarding questionable stops and repeated denial of legal rights. Captain Pierce announced the department would hold a formal hearing to decide if both men should be terminated. Blake spent his days consulting union lawyers, grim-faced, while Grant avoided calls and appeared to have quietly resigned. Rumors flew that he might leave the city altogether, claiming he'd been railroaded. Whatever he did, his record would remain stained. One afternoon, Malik arrived for the weekly task force meeting, only to find a small group of uniformed officers clustered outside the building. They held signs proclaiming solidarity for due process for our brothers and accusing the city of bowing to media hype. Their faces were taut with frustration. Malik approached calmly, unsure if they would confront him, but as he passed, they simply stared, a few glaring openly. He gave them a measured nod, thinking of the many times he'd stood before men and women in uniform who felt misunderstood. Now he stood on the opposite side, demanding accountability that some officers resented. Inside, Councilman Reeves studied Malik's expression. "They showed up last night, too," Reeves said softly. "I had to explain we're not condemning the entire police force, just rooting out bad elements." Malik shrugged, aware it might be more complicated than that. "Every reform effort faces opposition from those who fear change," he said. "We must remain transparent. Otherwise, they'll assume we're targeting them unfairly." Reeves nodded, grateful for Malik's calm perspective. He knew the colonel's clear-eyed resolve was what kept this effort stable. At that evening's public forum, a young mother named Tasha testified, trembling as she spoke. "My son's 13, and they stopped him on the corner last month, said he matched a description. He was just walking home from school. They made him empty his backpack in the street." She paused, voice thick with emotion. "He's afraid to go out alone now. He asks if being black makes him a suspect." The room fell silent, the weight of her words pressing on everyone. Malik swallowed hard, recalling his own youth in a rough neighborhood before he enlisted. He had joined the army partly to escape that constant fear. Now he realized how deep the wounds went for families who never got away. When Tasha finished, applause broke out, some loud, some tentative. She left the microphone teary but relieved, and Malik wrote down her contact information. Her story would join the growing list of testimonies the task force gathered. He felt certain that, cumulatively, these voices could spark reforms. But it would be a battle against entrenched mindsets. The next day, Malik received an unexpected call from Sergeant Blake's union attorney, a curt woman named Harriet Lamb. "Colonel Jefferson, my client wishes to meet with you privately," she said. "He says you might be willing to hear him out. We're scheduling a mediation session." Malik froze in mild surprise. "I'm not sure what there is to mediate," he replied. Harriet pressed on. "He insists he has his reasons. The department has suspended him pending termination, and he wants to discuss alternatives." Carefully, Malik said, "I'll attend if the task force sees value in it, but I'm not inclined to cut deals." Harriet's sigh crackled through the line. "Just hear him out." That evening, Malik explained the situation to the rest of the task force. Captain Pierce, seated in the back, grunted softly. "I bet he's looking for a way out. Maybe an apology in exchange for some leniency. But if there's new evidence of wrongdoing, we can't bury it." Malik agreed. "I have no intention of burying anything. Yet if he's ready to confess or expose deeper issues in the department, maybe this can help us." Reeves looked dubious. "Just be cautious. He may be desperate." 2 nights later, in a small room at City Hall, Malik and Sergeant Blake finally came face to face. The union attorney sat beside Blake, while a neutral mediator oversaw the meeting. Blake's eyes flicked down, avoiding direct contact at first. Gone was his usual swagger. He looked drained, older than his years. "Thank you for agreeing to talk," he mumbled. Malik folded his arms. "We have limited time. Why did you request this meeting?" Blake hesitated, then inhaled sharply. "Look, I know I messed up with your case. I admit I let my biases affect me. But there's more going on. It's not just me. The department's culture encourages rough policing in certain neighborhoods." He reached into a folder, pulling out internal memos and shift briefings. Harriet, his attorney, placed her hand on his arm as if to calm him. "Sergeant Blake has documentation of higher-ups pressuring officers to maintain specific arrest quotas, focusing on areas with high minority populations. Malik's brow furrowed. "Explain." Blake's voice wavered, torn between guilt and resentment. "We'd get these subtle directives like, keep that block under control, or we need more arrests from that zone. If we questioned it, we were told to do our jobs. Over time, it became normal to treat folks like criminals." He slumped, eyes flicking to Malik. "I'm not justifying what I did to you. I'm trying to show you we're part of a system. Some of us got caught up." The mediator took notes as Harriet pushed forward more documents. "This is your chance to create broader change," she said to Malik. "Sergeant Blake is willing to testify if it helps him avoid a harsh penalty." Malik studied the papers, official emails discussing hotspot enforcement, veiled instructions about hitting numbers. Certain sergeants wrote that we can't go soft in low-income areas. It wasn't explicit racism, but it was coded language, the kind that often led to discrimination. He glanced at Blake. "So you want me to speak on your behalf at the disciplinary hearing?" Blake exhaled. "Yes, if you believe we can root out the real cause. I'll accept my suspension, but I'd rather see the command structure held accountable too." Malik felt a swirl of conflicting emotions. Blake was the man who'd laughed in his face, denied him basic rights. Yet here he was, ready to name bigger issues. After a long pause, Malik nodded slowly. "I'm willing to consider your testimony, but no deals that compromise the truth. I'm not guaranteeing anything." Blake's shoulders sagged in relief. Harriet muttered, "Fair enough." They agreed that Blake would appear before the task force to provide detailed testimony under oath. In return, Malik would advocate for the department to consider his cooperation during final discipline recommendations. That didn't mean absolution, but it might save Blake from a total dismissal. When Malik left the mediation room, he felt torn. Part of him wished Blake would simply be fired, an example to others. But another part recognized that if the department's culture rewarded aggressive policing, then one resignation or termination wouldn't fix it. Tearing out the roots meant addressing command-level policies. If Blake's documents shed light on those practices, it could spark real structural shifts. Once again, Malik found himself carrying the burden of balancing justice against progress. He reported back to the task force, sharing highlights of his encounter. Reactions were mixed. Captain Pierce asked pointedly, "How do we know he's not just saving his own hide?" Malik could only shrug. "We won't know until we see what he produces and if it checks out." The public defender on the task force, a wiry man named Jackson, pointed out that sometimes the worst offenders had valuable information. It's classic in law enforcement. Flip the small fish to catch the bigger ones. We just have to ensure no one gets undue leniency. By the next week, rumors circulated that an entire chain of command might be implicated in questionable policing strategies. The city's chief of police, an older man named Halston, made a brief statement to the press denying any systemic bias. "We target crime, not neighborhoods," he insisted. But as more community members came forward, citing long histories of being stopped for trivial reasons, Halston's words rang hollow. Malik braced for turbulence. If the top brass felt threatened, they'd fight back. Throughout it all, Ms. Ruth kept stopping by Malik's house to drop off homemade food, reminding him to take care of himself. "You can't save the world on an empty stomach, Colonel," she'd say, fussing over him like a mother hen. And every time he leafed through the notes and affidavits piling up, he'd remember her caution. "Keep your eyes open. I've seen promises vanish." He silently promised he wouldn't let these new revelations fizzle out. Even after that small break with Sergeant Blake, Malik knew more battles lay ahead. Reform was never linear. It came with setbacks, betrayals, half-wins. As he prepared for another task force meeting, he drew on his army training, reminding himself how each hard-fought victory on the battlefield paved the way for the next. In Westbridge, the fight wasn't for foreign soil, but for something equally precious: the honor and dignity of every person walking its streets. A steady rain fell on Westbridge the morning Sergeant Blake arrived for his private testimony before the Police Accountability Task Force. Word had spread that he possessed documents implicating senior command in biased policing directives. Cameras flashed as he stepped inside City Hall, head bowed beneath an umbrella. Colonel Malik Jefferson was already there, reviewing notes with Councilman Reeves and the panel members. They waited in a dimly lit hearing room, its polished floor reflecting the overhead fluorescence. Tension crackled like static in the damp air. Although the public was barred from this closed session, rumors buzzed outside that huge revelations lay ahead. When Blake entered, flanked by his union lawyer Harriet Lamb, he caught Malik's eye but looked away quickly. The sergeant wore a crisp uniform, though its authority seemed diminished by the circumstances. The mediator overseeing the session motioned for everyone to sit at a rectangular table. Councilman Reeves cleared his throat. "Sergeant Blake, you understand this testimony is under oath and recorded?" Blake nodded, shoulders rigid. "Yes, sir." His voice sounded drained, as if each word cost him an ounce of pride. Captain Pierce sat on the task force side, arms folded. She'd shown no eagerness to grant leniency, but her expression betrayed a flicker of curiosity about what might emerge. Pastor Williams, another panel member, offered a brief invocation for truth and integrity, to which no one objected. After finishing, he gestured for Blake to begin. The sergeant glanced at Harriet, who gave a subtle nod, then faced the table. He started cautiously, describing how beat officers were pressured to make arrests in certain sectors. "I'm not proud of it," he murmured. "We were told to clean up the rough neighborhoods, by any means necessary. There was talk about showing visible enforcement to keep folks in line. If we didn't deliver enough stops or citations, we were called lazy." Captain Pierce's jaw tightened at that admission. She'd suspected such tactics festered below the surface, but never heard them spelled out so clearly. Malik leaned forward, voice controlled. "Could you specify who issued these orders?" Blake inhaled. It mostly came through briefing memos. Officially, they just mentioned crime stats and hotspots. But in private, Lieutenant Franco, he was my direct superior, would emphasize we had to target certain blocks to meet quotas. We'd get praised for high arrest numbers, criticized if we didn't produce results. He paused, eyes flicking upward. The assumption was that everyone in those areas was trouble. We treated them all as suspects, especially if they looked a certain way. A chill settled on the room. Councilman Reeves scrawled furious notes, while Harriet Lamb pushed forward a binder of documents. "These are copies of shift briefings, internal emails, and performance reviews that Sergeant Blake has collected," she explained. "Some language is coded, but it's clear how minority neighborhoods were singled out. In one memo, an upper-level commander wrote, 'Don't let them forget who's in charge.'" She turned a page, reading the line aloud. "Take a firm hand with repeat players." But it turned out many so-called repeat players had never been convicted of anything. Pastor Williams's brow furrowed. "You're saying the department effectively sanctioned harassment?" Blake shifted. "They wouldn't call it that, but yes. We were expected to show force. If a detainee complained, we'd bury it in paperwork or claim the suspect resisted. People usually gave up trying to fight back. Then Colonel Jefferson came along." He trailed off, glancing uneasily at Malik, who met his gaze calmly. "Continue," Malik said gently. Blake sighed. "When we realized he was an Army colonel, it spooked us. We knew if it got out, everything could unravel. So we doubled down on our story, hoping no one would question it." A murmur ran through the task force members. Captain Pierce looked stricken, recalling how easily the department might have buried the case if not for Malik's rank and persistence. Councilman Reeves asked, "Who above Lieutenant Franco approved these strategies? Names and positions, please." Blake hesitated, then opened Harriet's binder. Deputy Chief Willard was aware, he said quietly. He signed off on the monthly crime stat updates and praised the squads with the highest arrest counts in those zones. Chief Halston, I suspect, had an idea, but kept his hands clean. Everything was couched in language about crime rates. Yet we knew the real message: flood those neighborhoods with enforcement, no matter the actual individual circumstances. Captain Pierce's cheeks blanched. She'd long admired Deputy Chief Willard for his managerial efficiency. If he was complicit, the department's leadership was compromised at its core. Malik's voice remained steady. Have you evidence directly linking Willard to instructions that encourage or condone biased stops? Blake tapped a page. Yes, an email referencing removing troublemakers at every opportunity. He singled out certain blocks that were predominantly black. He never said race explicitly, but it was implied. A tense silence followed. Pastor Williams spoke softly. We need to bring this to the public. We must be transparent. Reeves nodded but looked wary. Let's first verify these documents thoroughly. Harriet cleared her throat. Sergeant Blake is prepared to give sworn affidavits. Of course, we expect the board to consider his cooperation when deciding his fate. Her statement hung in the air, an implicit bargaining chip. Malik studied Blake. You realize this might spark a major investigation, reaching well beyond your own actions. Blake lifted his chin, though his voice trembled. I know. I can't undo what I did, but maybe I can help fix what's broken. For a moment, pity crossed Malik's face. The sergeant was a flawed man caught in a flawed system, revealing truths that could topple careers. Still, the path to redemption was steep. When the session ended, the mediator escorted Blake out. Harriet handed the binder over to the task force, promising digital files soon. Everyone sat quietly, absorbing the weight of new evidence. Finally, Councilman Reeves broke the silence. We'll need to expand our scope. This is bigger than we thought. Captain Pierce nodded, voice trembling with anger. I'll request an independent auditor from the state to assist us. If the chief is involved, we can't rely solely on internal processes. Malik exhaled, heart pounding. This revelation validated all the stories they'd heard, but also meant a fierce battle awaited them. Outside City Hall, the rain had eased to a drizzle and a few reporters lingered. The closed-door meeting had stoked speculation. Harriet hurried Sergeant Blake into a waiting car, ignoring shouted questions. Meanwhile, Malik emerged with the rest of the task force. Cameras flashed, but he simply stated, We're investigating new findings. The community will be updated as soon as possible. Then he walked away, ducking under the building's stone arch to avoid further questions. That evening, the task force convened an emergency discussion with the mayor. In a cramped office lined with file boxes, Malik laid out their next steps. If Deputy Chief Willard truly directed these tactics, we must bring in external agencies, state or federal. A top-down inquiry, not just an internal review. Mayor Langley's face betrayed nervousness. This could devastate public confidence in the department, he mumbled, hands shaking. Better that truth come out now than later, Pastor Williams countered. Reeves nodded, adding, Cover-ups only deepen distrust. Reluctantly, the mayor agreed. Plans were made to contact the state attorney general's office and request oversight. As the meeting ended, Ms. Ruth arrived unexpectedly with a thermos of tea and biscuits, determined to show support. She offered them to the weary participants, who thanked her gratefully. Malik gave her a tired smile. Your timing is perfect, Ms. Ruth. She patted his arm. You need strength for what's next, dear. Indeed, the storm broke the following morning when an anonymous source leaked portions of Blake's documents to the local newspaper. Headlines screamed, Deputy Chief linked to quotas, targeted policing in minority areas. Social media erupted, with outraged citizens demanding resignations. The police union scrambled to distance itself from senior command. Chief Halston, in a hastily arranged press conference, claimed ignorance. "We do not condone biased enforcement. Any allegations against my deputies must be investigated." But his demeanor looked shaken. Calls flooded the city council's offices, some praising the task force's fortitude, others lamenting a war on cops. The tension on the streets rose tangibly. Some neighborhoods erupted in heated conversations about how they'd known this truth all along. Others expressed confusion, believing the department had been wrongly maligned. The wedge of distrust, hammered deeper over years, now fully split the city's consciousness. That afternoon, a letter from the state attorney general arrived, agreeing to launch a formal probe. They assigned a special investigator with broad powers to subpoena department leadership. News vans clustered around the police station, capturing the swirl of speculation about who might be indicted next. A few officers marched out, hands in the air, proclaiming loyalty to the public. Others barricaded themselves inside, muttering about betrayal. For Malik, it felt like the city was stepping onto a tightrope. One misstep, one sign of institutional defiance, could spark chaos. Yet from chaos, he believed, came the chance for rebirth. As he reviewed the next batch of complaints, anonymous letters revealing more racial profiling, his resolve hardened. This city needed to tear down the rotted framework of policing that allowed men like Blake to flourish, and if that meant short-term upheaval, so be it. He thought of Tasha's son and Dion, of Miss Ruth's congregation, and of everyone too fearful to speak. Their courage fueled his steps. By nightfall, the main thoroughfares were quiet. Rain returned in a cold, steady drizzle, washing over empty sidewalks. City Hall's grand pillars shone under damp streetlights, a silent witness to the pivotal changes unfolding. Malik left the building, head bowed, carrying a folder of newly signed affidavits. Captain Pierce walked beside him, her expression grim but determined. "No turning back," she murmured. He nodded, thinking how everything had begun with a single wrongful arrest. Now an entire hierarchy risked collapse, but somewhere in that collapse lay hope, the promise that Westbridge could rebuild an institution that protected everyone, free of fear and discrimination. As thunder rumbled overhead, Malik gripped the folder tighter. He recalled an army motto: "In unity, strength." He hoped the city would hold together through this storm, forging unity out of conflict, forging a future where no one's basic rights were dismissed with laughter. He stepped into the rain, unafraid of the darkness ahead. Their mission was clear. The only path was forward. Overnight, Westbridge's tension reached a precarious peak. Come morning, the headline accusing Deputy Chief Willard of orchestrating targeted quotas was splashed across every local news outlet. On social media, residents shared their shock or their grim satisfaction. Many insisted they had long known the department practiced discriminatory policing. Others complained it was all a smear campaign, fueling anti-police sentiment. Against this cacophony, Colonel Malik Jefferson awoke before dawn, steeling himself for the day's demands. He would be meeting the state's special investigator, a seasoned attorney named Eleanor Langford, who had arrived in town to launch the external probe. As the sun rose, small groups of citizens clustered outside the shuttered grocery on Elm Street, or inside the smoky confines of a neighborhood cafe, debating the city's unraveling secrets. Downtown, business owners worried about the possible riots if the tension boiled over. Police cruisers, manned by tense officers, patrolled aimlessly, their occupants unwilling to engage in friendly conversation or wave to passing pedestrians. The entire city felt like it was holding its breath. Malik reached City Hall just as a security guard was unlocking the front doors. He carried a heavy binder packed with testimonies, statements from the task force's forums, and the damning documents Sergeant Blake had surrendered. Waiting in the lobby was Captain Pierce, her posture rigid. Her eyes flickered relief when she saw him. "We just got word that Investigator Langford is upstairs," she said. "She wants to speak to you first." Malik nodded, adjusting his collar. "All right, let's give her everything we have." They found Langford in a borrowed office near the mayor's suite, scanning news articles on a tablet. A tall, silver-haired woman with precise diction, she stood to greet them. "Colonel Jefferson, Captain Pierce," she said briskly, extending a handshake. "Thank you for arranging this meeting. I'm here to ensure we conduct a thorough, impartial inquiry." She gestured for them to sit. Malik noticed her cool, analytical gaze. This was someone accustomed to dissecting corruption without blinking. Langford asked direct questions: how the documents were obtained, whether any patterns stood out, and whether the police leadership had attempted to suppress evidence. Pierce recounted the flurry of internal memos pointing to biased enforcement. Malik described the community testimonies, from Tasha's frightened son to a dozen others who felt systematically harassed. "A single wrongful arrest might be dismissed as a mistake," Malik said, his voice steady. "But these patterns reveal deliberate strategies that targeted poor and minority communities for easy arrests." Langford pressed for details. Names, dates, repeated incidents. Malik pushed the binder across the table. "It's all here." An hour passed in careful questioning. Finally, Langford nodded, eyes grave. "This is extensive. My team will corroborate everything. We'll request further records from Deputy Chief Willard and Lieutenant Franco, but we'll also examine the entire chain of command. If the chief or anyone else abetted these quotas, we'll find out." Her tone brooked no argument. Malik felt a subtle spark of hope. The city had never faced an investigator with such sweeping authority. If she carried through, no corner would remain dark. They scheduled a follow-up for the next day, then parted ways. In the corridor, Pierce released a slow breath. "She's not messing around," she remarked, half relieved and half anxious. "This could mean forced resignations all the way up the chain." Malik nodded. Better that than letting the rot stay hidden. He glanced at the clock on his phone. The first item on his schedule was a midday press briefing with Councilman Reeves. He dreaded standing before the cameras yet again, but transparency mattered now more than ever. At noon, they gathered in the City Hall press room. A forest of microphones lined the lectern, and local reporters nearly jostled for space. Behind Malik, Councilman Reeves shuffled note cards. He had insisted on reading an official statement first. "Westbridge has requested the full cooperation of our police department in the state investigation. We remain committed to fairness, and we ask the public to remain patient as this thorough review proceeds." Cameras flashed. A few skeptical murmurs spread through the press corps. Then Malik took the podium. He cleared his throat. "We formed the Police Accountability Task Force to uncover the truth. Now that an external probe has begun, we're turning over every shred of evidence. No one is above scrutiny. I encourage officers to come forward if they have knowledge of improper directives." One reporter raised a hand. "Colonel Jefferson, what about calls from certain groups that the entire department be disbanded and rebuilt from scratch?" Malik inhaled, aware such calls had grown louder online. "We understand the anger, but a wholesale disbandment is a drastic step. Let's give the investigation room to do its job. If leadership is complicit, they'll face consequences." The press briefing ended with flashes and more questions shouted at Malik's back. Outside, a small demonstration waited, signs reading "Clean House" or "Justice for All." Some recognized Malik, offering waves and thumbs up. Others seemed uncertain, chanting broader slogans about abolishing police. Tension flared when a few uniformed officers arrived on foot patrol, exchanging wary looks with the protesters. Sensing potential conflict, Malik quietly stepped aside. letting the moment pass. He wasn't here to direct the crowd, but to ensure they all had the truth soon. Back in her office, Captain Pierce found an email from Deputy Chief Willard. It was curt, borderline dismissive. My directives followed legal guidelines. Any suggestion of targeting certain demographics is false. We strongly deny wrongdoing. She gritted her teeth. He was doubling down, yet the evidence told a different story. She closed her laptop, remembering the day she first joined the force, filled with optimism about serving her hometown. Now she felt a strange ache, as though something she loved had betrayed her. Meanwhile, Ms. Ruth had organized a prayer circle in front of her small church. About 15 people held hands and bowed their heads, asking for healing in Westbridge. Drivers slowed to watch. Some joined the circle spontaneously. The group prayed for honesty among officials, safety for the fearful and calm in tense streets. Ms. Ruth later called Malik, her voice soft but insistent. "We lifted you up in prayer, dear. Keep strong." He smiled, thanking her. That quiet support buoyed him through the day's relentless swirl of accusations and denials. By late afternoon, Sergeant Blake made a surprising appearance at the task force's public office hours. He arrived looking disheveled and anxious, ignoring the side glances from staffers. Malik invited him into a private corner. "What's going on?" he asked. Blake ran a hand over his face. "Willard's calling me a liar. Says I falsified documents to save my skin. I'm worried about retaliation." Malik studied him carefully. "Retaliation how?" Blake glanced around, lowering his voice. "I've had threatening notes left on my car. People in the department think I'm a traitor." Malik folded his arms. "Do you trust the task force or the state investigator enough to protect you?" After a pause, Blake exhaled. "I have to. There's no one else." Malik promised to relay this concern to Investigator Langford. If Blake was indeed telling the truth, intimidation tactics would only further validate the suspicion of deep-seated corruption. Shaken, the sergeant left, casting a final uneasy glance at the modest office. Malik watched him go, reflecting on how moral lines could blur for people who never imagined themselves as villains. He hoped it wasn't too late for Blake to reclaim something worthwhile. That evening, at the weekly community forum, Tasha reappeared, this time with her son beside her. The boy stood shyly while Tasha shared updates. "He's still anxious, but we've been connected to counseling through a local nonprofit. Thank you for listening to us." Malik nodded from his seat, grateful that at least a glimmer of help was reaching families harmed by biased policing. Other speakers recounted older stories, reaching back years, giving the crowd a sense of how long these practices might have persisted. By night's end, frustration and hope mingled in the air. People departed in small clusters, discussing how best to keep the pressure on city leaders. Ms. Ruth discreetly dropped off a tray of homemade cookies on Malik's table. He smiled, feeling her steady presence once again. As midnight approached, he returned home, leafing through the day's notes. The binder was thicker than ever. The stench of systemic injustice filled every page, but so did the seeds of potential change. A robust investigation led by an unflinching special counsel, a community finding its voice, and a police captain willing to face painful truths. He reminded himself that progress was seldom neat. In conflict, seeds of genuine reform could sprout, but he also sensed the next storm looming. If higher-ups resisted, or if the chief tried to circle wagons, the city could fracture further. Malik set his jaw, recalling the Army's credo of perseverance. You push forward, you adapt. You don't let the enemy's might or your own fatigue break your will. Here, the enemy was an entrenched culture, silent for too long. He vowed not to falter, for Tasha's son, for Dion, for Ms. Ruth, and for every unnamed soul who simply wanted to walk their own streets without fear. He doused the light, fatigue dragging at him. Tomorrow, Investigator Langford would conduct interviews with top brass, possibly confronting Deputy Chief Willard. Rumors hinted that the chief himself might be called to testify. If those leaders resisted or threatened to purge whistleblowers, Westbridge could see an upheaval on a scale no one expected. Malik closed his eyes, exhaling slowly. One day at a time, one more push. Each step forward was a stride closer to accountability. Outside his window, a street lamp flickered in the hush, illuminating damp pavement. The city rested beneath a cloud-laden sky, uncertain but not without promise. He breathed deeply, preparing for the challenges waiting at dawn. Through the swirl of suspicion and hope, one truth guided him. Real change never happened until people shone a bright light on the darkest corners. And for the first time in years, Westbridge was flipping on every single switch. Nightfall shrouded Westbridge in a tense quiet as investigator Eleanor Langford began her first round of interviews at the police station. In a windowless back office, she set up a temporary command post, accompanied by 2 assistants armed with laptops. Officers were summoned one by one. Some arrived visibly nervous, some grimly defiant, all unsettled by the knowledge that everything they said could lead to disciplinary action, or worse. Deputy Chief Willard was scheduled for the following morning, the centerpiece of her probe into biased policing directives. A hush spread through the corridors each time Langford or her team walked by. Colonel Malik Jefferson and Captain Pierce watched these proceedings from the sidelines, staying out of the interrogation rooms, but offering support to any officer who requested help. Captain Pierce knew that if Willard felt cornered, he might lash out or implicate others. Rumor had it the chief might bar him from official duties pending the inquiry, but no one confirmed it. Meanwhile, rank-and-file officers whispered about outside meddling, though some quietly acknowledged relief that wrongdoing might finally see sunlight. As dawn broke on Westbridge, a new wave of anxiety washed through the city. Media vans lined the street outside the station, awaiting a glimpse of Willard's arrival. Inside, word circulated that he had demanded a private meeting with the chief before facing Langford. Tensions spiked when a closed-door session took place near the chief's office. No details leaked, but speculation ran rampant. Was Willard threatening to resign, bargaining for protection, or planning to scapegoat subordinates? No one knew. Shortly after 8, Investigator Langford took her seat in the largest interrogation room, bright lights overhead. On the wall behind her, a single camera recorded everything. Willard entered stiffly, impeccably dressed in a crisp uniform. He declined to remove his cap despite standard procedure. Langford merely offered a thin smile and pressed record. Across Westbridge, watchers speculated about how that interview would go, and how close the city's leadership might be to collapsing under scandal. Malik spent the morning at the community center, attending yet another forum. This one addressed the emotional toll of policing on families, led by social workers and counselors who'd volunteered their time. Tasha and her son attended, along with 24 other residents, mothers, fathers, grandparents. As a counselor guided them through discussions, tears filled many eyes. Tales emerged of sleepless nights, children dreading footsteps behind them, entire households living in a quiet state of fear. Malik watched from the back row, reminded of war zones where daily survival overshadowed every dream. Yet these citizens lived under that dread in their own neighborhoods, under a system meant to protect them. During a break, Tasha approached him. "My boy wants to join the army someday," she confided, voice trembling. "But he's scared of being profiled before he can even graduate." Malik felt a familiar ache. "If that's his dream, we'll make sure he gets there safely," he promised. "And hopefully, by the time he's ready, Westbridge will have changed." They exchanged a small smile, though both knew change came slowly. Near midday, Captain Pierce called Malik with urgent news. Willard's interview ended abruptly. He stormed out, refusing to answer further questions unless he had departmental counsel. Langford might seek a court order. Malik thanked her, tension knotting his stomach. The risk of a standoff loomed. If Willard refused to cooperate, the Attorney General's office could move to subpoena him. That would escalate the city's turmoil. But letting him slide would be a betrayal of everyone's trust. He decided to head to City Hall and confer with the task force. Councilman Reeves was already there, flipping through pages of updates from Langford's team. "We have enough for an immediate motion to suspend Willard," Reeves said, looking exhausted. "But the chief is resisting. Says it sets a dangerous precedent." Malik sighed. A dangerous precedent is ignoring evidence of wrongdoing at the top. If he's obstructing the investigation, that alone warrants suspension. Reeves agreed, scribbling notes, then exhaled. The city manager is dithering, worried about lawsuits from the union. Everyone's afraid of stepping on landmines. By mid-afternoon, an impromptu press conference formed outside the station. A tall, stern-faced woman in a suit, one of Langford's assistants, stood behind a podium. "Deputy Chief Willard has ceased cooperation with the inquiry," she announced, cameras flashing. "We are petitioning the courts for enforcement of our subpoena powers. We regret that this step is necessary, but no one is exempt from accountability." Reporters thrust microphones forward, clamoring for details. "Does this imply a cover-up?" one shouted. The assistant repeated a scripted line. "We have reason to believe the deputy chief holds information vital to the investigation." Then she stepped away, ignoring follow-up questions. Within the hour, Westbridge's social media lit up, with half the city calling for Willard's immediate suspension and the other half bemoaning a witch hunt. The police union tried to calm the uproar, releasing a brief statement that they supported any fair probe. Yet behind closed doors, union reps bristled at the idea of the task force or the state attorney stepping too forcefully on departmental autonomy. Colonel Jefferson scrolled through the swirling commentary, feeling torn between relief that the truth was emerging and fear that the conflict might boil over into public unrest. That evening, Ms. Ruth hosted a larger prayer vigil on the courthouse steps. Over 100 people gathered with candles, singing softly. Pastor Williams offered words of unity, urging the community to stay calm and keep faith in the process. Malik lingered at the edge, bowing his head along with the crowd. Surrounded by flickering lights, he felt an odd hush settle into his bones, like the quiet before a decisive battle. He prayed for clarity, for justice that served all, for a resolution that forged a better city rather than tearing it apart. Later, in the hush of night, he joined Captain Pierce at a small diner, the neon sign outside casting pinkish light across the booth. Both were too keyed up to sleep. Pierce pushed aside a plate of half-eaten fries, frowning. "I fear the chief might stand behind Willard to protect the department's image. If that happens, we're talking open war with the state investigators." Malik nodded. "It's a possibility, but if the city chooses to shield Willard, the public backlash will be immense." A battered TV over the counter flashed scenes of the vigil. A local news anchor recounted how Westbridge was on the brink, summing up in breathless tones. Tempers flare as top police brass refuses to comply. Pierce sighed. "This was never how I envisioned my career." They parted ways just before midnight, each weighed down by swirling uncertainties. Across town, Investigator Langford and her team compiled transcripts from interviews, drafting motions to enforce Willard's compliance. The Attorney General, reading their late-night briefs, readied a statement that might be released the next day if no compromise was reached. In the quiet corners of the police station, staffers huddled anxiously, wary of a chain reaction that could cost them their jobs or even spark citywide protests. As Colonel Jefferson finally pulled into his driveway, Ms. Ruth sat on his front step, a small lantern illuminating her folded hands. "Lordy, child, you're working too hard," she said gently, standing to greet him. "Things are moving fast." Malik gave a weary laugh. "Faster than we expected, but maybe that's what's needed." She handed him a small paper bag. "Cookies. They help in times of trouble." He smiled in gratitude, mind drifting to how such small kindness contrasted with the swirling chaos in the city. Ms. Ruth squeezed his arm. "Don't fret. Goodness outlasts turmoil." Inside, Malik placed the paper bag on his kitchen counter, then settled in to review messages on his phone. Tasha had texted him thanks for the day's forum. Dion left a voicemail saying more kids were willing to share their stories. Sergeant Blake emailed new details about quotas from prior years, apparently more evidence that the deputy chief had manipulated data. Each message tugged at Malik's heart, demanding he keep pushing, keep the flame of accountability alive. He scribbled a short note to himself. "Convene emergency task force meeting tomorrow. Review Willard's refusal to cooperate. Decide next steps." He noted a second bullet. "Coordinate with Langford. Subpoena updates." Then a third. "Speak with city manager about possible leadership overhaul in PD." After capping his pen, he realized how unbelievably tangled this had become. A year ago, he was just a colonel stopping by a cafe to help a frightened barista. Now he was knee-deep in an overhaul of an entire police institution. Yet in truth, he believed it was no coincidence. He'd always sworn to defend people who lacked the power to defend themselves. Outside, the clouds masked any moonlight, leaving the street in near-total darkness. The city seemed to be in that same dark, stumbling for direction. But if all went as it should, tomorrow might bring more clarity, or a collision with the department's highest ranks. Malik closed his eyes, remembering Ms. Ruth's parting words. Goodness outlasts turmoil. He clung to them as he drifted to uneasy sleep, praying that the morning sun would shine on a West Bridge, ready to confront its broken pieces, and finally, wholeheartedly, begin to heal. By sunrise, City Hall was surrounded by urgent chatter. Word had spread. The State Attorney General's office would announce whether Deputy Chief Willard must comply with the subpoena or face contempt. Residents gathered with signs, some pleading for a thorough cleanup of the department, others fearful that this saga would weaken law enforcement. Colonel Malik Jefferson arrived early, stepping past TV crews and uniformed officers who stood watch near the main entrance. He felt the weight of expectation in every glance. Inside, the Accountability Task Force members assembled in a large chamber usually reserved for council meetings. Folding chairs were arranged in rows for the public. At the head of the room sat Councilman Reeves, Investigator Eleanor Langford, and a representative from the State Attorney General's office, a somber, broad-shouldered man named Wallace Green. Captain Pierce stood near the wall, arms crossed, scanning the space as if bracing for a storm. Pastor Williams offered hushed words to community members who clutched photos of loved ones claiming police mistreatment. Ms. Ruth slipped quietly into the back row, determined to witness the final steps of the process she had prayed over. Shortly before 9, the meeting began. Councilman Reeves banged the gavel, requesting order. "We convene today to address critical developments in the investigation into biased policing," he said, voice echoing in the high-ceilinged room. "Investigator Langford will share her team's findings and the State Attorney General's directives." A hush fell. Cameras rolled. Langford stood, smoothing her jacket. "In the past weeks," she began, voice crisp, "we have interviewed multiple officers, reviewed internal memos, and analyzed the documents provided by Sergeant Blake. Evidence points to a persistent, racially skewed enforcement strategy that targeted specific neighborhoods to meet arrest quotas." Murmurs rippled across the audience. She paused. We have attempted to interview Deputy Chief Willard, who thus far refused full cooperation. Consequently, our office sought judicial enforcement of our subpoena. This morning, the court granted our request. Deputy Chief Willard must appear for questioning today or be held in contempt. A collective intake of breath followed her declaration. Cameras pivoted to the aisle, where Willard himself appeared, flanked by two attorneys. His expression was grim. He stepped to the front, ignoring jeers from some in the crowd. Green, the Attorney General's representative, addressed him sternly. "Deputy Chief Willard, you stand at a crossroads. Will you testify openly, or shall we file immediate contempt charges?" Willard's attorneys whispered in his ear. The deputy chief ran a hand over his neatly trimmed hair, eyes flickering around the room, clearly torn between defiance and resignation. Slowly, Willard approached the microphone. "I have decided to speak," he announced, voice taut. "But let it be known, I never intended to harass any specific group. We tracked crime patterns. If certain neighborhoods had higher crime, we placed more officers there. The city demanded results." He glanced at the crowd, his face flushed. "Sometimes we overshot, but that was never personal." Investigator Langford tilted her head. "And the quotas? The memos urging arrests at every opportunity?" Willard's eyes narrowed. "I used strong language. We had a job to do, reduce crime stats." He hesitated, then gritted his teeth. "Look, Deputy Chief isn't just an office job. The politicians want numbers. The chief wants promotion. So yes, I pushed squads to show results. Maybe lines got crossed." The tension thickened. Langford's next question cut like a blade. "Did you or the chief instruct officers to focus on minority residents, presuming them criminals?" Willard's mouth pinched. The room held its breath. "We never said it outright," he muttered. "But some areas, we believed they needed extra discipline. We treated them as high risk. That's all I'll say." Someone in the back cried out, "That's exactly the problem." Another voice shouted, "We told you for years." Councilman Reeves hammered the gavel, pleading for order. Over the next half hour, Langford pressed Willard to acknowledge systematic bias. He avoided direct admissions, but each defensive claim revealed more about the department's flawed culture. Each time he tried to justify arrests, Langford countered with data from the binder Colonel Jefferson had compiled, listing families who were targeted despite no criminal history. Willard appeared cornered. Many in the crowd shook their heads, outraged at his half-hearted confessions. Finally, Ms. Ruth stood. Her voice, though soft, rang with authority. "You say you never meant personal harm, yet look around you. These are your people, parents, children, folks who keep this city alive. Your quotas turned them into easy marks." She paused. "You have a badge to protect, not to persecute. Can you see how you failed them?" Willard looked away, unable to respond. The tension snapped when Chief Halston himself emerged from a side door, face pale. He strode to the front, ignoring official protocol. "I can't watch this any longer," he declared, voice trembling. I bear ultimate responsibility for encouraging statistics-driven enforcement. I was the one pushing Deputy Chief Willard. I never said target minorities, but I accepted the outcomes. I turned a blind eye to the complaints." A stunned hush overtook the chamber. Halston sighed heavily. "I realize now how we lost our moral compass." The admission left even Willard speechless. Cameras whirred. Investigator Langford stared at Halston, expression unreadable. "Are you prepared to face the consequences?" she asked. The chief lifted his gaze, something like relief crossing his features. "I am. As of this moment, I resign from my position. I will cooperate fully with the Attorney General's probe." Gasps scattered, mingling with a sense of release. Ms. Ruth clasped her hands, tears in her eyes. Captain Pierce stared, stunned, never imagining the chief would fold so abruptly. Malik Jefferson exchanged a glance with Councilman Reeves, each uncertain if this was a triumph or a tragedy, or perhaps both. Langford nodded, her voice calm. "Your resignation does not absolve potential liability. The investigation will continue, and if the evidence warrants, charges may be filed." Halston lowered his head. "I understand." Willard hovered nearby, face ashen. He too looked moments from stepping down. A hush blanketed the room as the city's two highest-ranking police officials stood exposed under the fluorescent lights, undone by their own system. After a moment's stillness, Colonel Jefferson rose from his seat at the task force table. His voice was steady, not triumphant. "For those harmed by these practices, this is a day of reckoning, but it's also a day to begin rebuilding trust. A new leadership can take root, one that honors the core principle of serving and protecting every resident. I hope we'll focus not on vengeance, but on ensuring no one endures this injustice again." Applause erupted, echoing against the high walls. Some in the audience wept openly. Others stood, fists raised, signifying relief at long-awaited validation. Pastor Williams stepped forward, quietly suggesting a moment of silence. The crowd agreed. Heads bowed, tears fell, regrets and relief mingled in the hush. Television cameras zoomed in, capturing an entire city in the throes of transformation. When the silence ended, Ms. Ruth lifted her candle high, a gesture of hope. Across the chamber, Tasha guided her son's hand to do the same. The boy stared at Colonel Jefferson with awe, seeing in him the embodiment of courage. Within the hour, Chief Halston's formal resignation was filed, and Deputy Chief Willard was placed on indefinite administrative leave, pending further legal action. Investigator Langford prepared to expand her inquiry, confident that she could now proceed without obstructions. Reporters outside scrambled to piece together headlines that captured the gravity of the moment. The phrase, "A new dawn in Westbridge policing," ricocheted across social media before dinner time. That night, the Accountability Task Force held a final emergency session to plot next steps. They decided the city would appoint an interim chief from outside Westbridge, someone with no ties to the old regime. Councilman Reeves promised immediate funding to recruit new leadership with proven commitments to constitutional policing. Captain Pierce, shaken but resolute, offered to stay on temporarily and assist the transition. "I want to help restore faith," she said. "We owe it to every citizen." Malik thanked her and the entire panel. "We've accomplished what many deemed impossible," he told them quietly. "But our work isn't done. Beyond investigating, we must institute ongoing changes, clear guidelines, community oversight, zero tolerance for abuses. Only then can Westbridge truly heal." They nodded in agreement, shoulders sagging under the weight of what lay ahead. Reforms were never a swift fix, but a continuous effort requiring vigilance and honesty. The next morning, the city woke to sunlight after weeks of rain and darkness. Outside City Hall, a group of residents spontaneously gathered, chalking messages of hope on the pavement. "Accountability is real," read one. "Rebuild with love," read another. A sense of cautious optimism spread, as if Westbridge finally felt the gloom lifting. Ms. Ruth arrived with coffee for the volunteers, greeting each person with a motherly hug. She paused to watch Colonel Jefferson approach the steps, a half-smile lighting her face. "What now, child?" she asked him. He looked around at the stirring city, at people who dared to believe change was possible. "We keep going," he answered softly. "We set up permanent oversight. We train officers to see neighbors, not targets. We measure success by community trust, not arrest tallies." Ms. Ruth nodded, eyes shining with pride. In the days that followed, national news outlets picked up the story of how one wrongful arrest had toppled a hierarchy of corruption. They hailed Colonel Jefferson's perseverance, praising his decision to stand up not just for himself, but for every marginalized voice. Families who had feared speaking out found new resolve. Formerly silent officers came forward with more evidence of wrongdoing. The whole city, once weighed down by cynicism, began forging unity in the wake of revelations. 2 weeks later, the Accountability Task Force finalized its recommendations: an external monitor, mandatory cultural competency training, strict anti-discrimination policies with real consequences, and monthly town halls. Captain Pierce helped draft orders for immediate changes to patrol procedures. Investigations continued into the old leadership's involvement, with Halston publicly declaring his remorse and Willard waiting for his fate in court. Though not everyone forgave them, many saw their downfall as a stern warning to future leaders. Amid these transformations, Tasha's son no longer quaked at the sight of a police uniform. Dayon's neighborhood reported fewer antagonistic patrols. Ms. Ruth's church group organized food drives with uniformed volunteers who genuinely engaged with the community. The bruises of injustice would linger, but each day brought small signs of healing, and Colonel Malik Jefferson, now recognized citywide as the catalyst, quietly insisted he was simply doing his duty. When asked if he would seek a public office, he merely smiled and said, "Service isn't limited to titles." He kept attending the forums, checking on families, ensuring the spotlight remained on the people most affected. He reminded them that vigilance must continue. Justice, after all, was an ongoing promise, not a single verdict. So Westbridge moved forward, slowly discarding the old ways that allowed a single police rank to overshadow basic rights, forging a new system where dignity belonged to everyone. The city's story became a lesson in how one courageous stand, by a man who refused to be mocked for his identity or rank, could unearth hidden truths and spark sweeping reforms. And in that new dawn, the laughter that once tried to diminish Colonel Jefferson's plea had been replaced by a chorus of voices united in a single refrain: "Never again."